2 days after a young mother was found in the Arizona desert, 2 infants were heard crying on the wet floor of a park restroom in Oxnard. 36 years later, those babies just stepped out of the file, alive, with new names and a future someone once tried to cut away. So the headline writes itself. The only question that matters doesn't. Who killed Marina Ramos? And why did the killer spare her daughters? Tonight, no hype. Just the timeline, the evidence we can actually cite, and the leads that still breathe after 3 decades. If the person who did this counted on time to erase the truth, time just changed sides. This video relies on publicly available reporting and official statements. It does not accuse any individual or entity. Where facts are incomplete, we label theories as open questions, not conclusions. If you want careful, source-based true crime that respects victims and avoids speculation, subscribe now and stay with me to the end. Because the last minutes of this story hold the most actionable leads. They were babies when the world lost their names. 2 sisters vanished into paperwork and silence after their mother was found murdered in the desert. 36 years later, they reappeared, alive, grown, and carrying new identities given to them as children. Their return answers one question and sharpens the only question that matters now. Who killed Marina Ramos? Start with the timeline that never stopped moving. In late 1989, Marina Ramos left California with her 2 daughters, one about a year old, the other a tiny infant, and a man some people knew only as Fernando. That nickname sits in the record like a label on a closed box. It tells you where to look, but not what's inside. What was his full name? Where did he live? How did he meet Marina? The reporting suggests he was part of her final weeks, and then he was a ghost stitched into memory. Days later, across a state line and away from the roads Marina knew, her body was discovered in the Arizona desert, Mojave County. The scene was stark and silent. There are crimes where the location is part of the message, and crimes where the location is just where the body stopped. Was this an attempt to erase her from the world she had lived in? A desert is good at erasing. Wind takes footprints, heat takes moisture. Time takes everything else. 2 days after Marina's body was found, 2 little girls were heard crying on the wet floor of a public restroom in a park in Oxnard, California. A passerby heard the sound and opened the door. The girls were there, alive, left behind by someone who didn't want to be seen. If you're writing the scene in your mind, resist the urge to put a face on that person. There are no confirmed witnesses who say they saw the drop-off happen at the exact second. We have the aftermath, not the moment. The infants were taken in, protected, placed into the system, and then given a second life that would last decades. New names, a foster home that didn't know their past. Later, an adoption by a family in Ventura County. It's easy to be angry at the system for not connecting the dots, but think about the tools available in the late 1980s. No rapid DNA matching in the public sphere. No nationalized instant databases talking to each other in daily time. And a mother whose identity itself would be a hurdle for years. Marina was not immediately identified. For a time, she existed in police records without her real name. Some reports say she had used an alias around that period, Maria Ortiz. An alias can be protection. It can also be a shield that keeps help from finding you. When authorities don't know exactly who the victim is, they struggle to map the life that led to the crime. Without the map, it's hard to see who else was on the road. What happens to a case like this after the initial surge? If there's no quick suspect, no sudden confession, and no forensic miracle, you get the long years. Detectives move to other assignments. Boxes go to shelves. People who might have talked forget what they wanted to say. A memory that felt hot and bright in 1989 becomes a half-remembered evening by 1999. And by 2009, it's a story someone tells at a kitchen table, bending with the weight of time. What hard facts survive 36 years? Surprisingly, more than you might think. Let's put the anchors in the ground. Anchor 1. Marina Ramos was murdered in Mojave County, Arizona, in 1989. Anchor 2. Her 2 daughters were found alive in an Oxnard restroom 2 days later and were placed in care, then adopted. Anchor 3. Marina's identity was finally confirmed years later, not through whispered rumor, but through forensic work that matched what had been unclear. Anchor 4. In 2025, investigators and partner organizations used modern DNA tools and outreach to locate the daughters, living as adults under the names given to them after adoption. Imagine learning, in your mid-30s, that you are missing. Imagine learning that your mother was a Jane Doe far from home, and that her name wasn't spoken out loud in the system for years. That's the human side of the Found Alive headline. Melissa and Tina, the adoptive names of Jasmine and Elizabeth, didn't know they were in a story at all. They had no memory of the murder, or the restroom, or the days that connect the two. The timeline that haunted the case never existed for them. Their first map of life began somewhere else, in a new family, in a different version of the world. When authorities talk about finding them, the tone is careful. This is good news wrapped around an old wound. It gives the living a chance to speak, and it gives the dead a chance to be named. So now the question that pulls viewers in: does the discovery of the daughters close the case or open it? Think about motive. There are crimes that center on the victim and crimes that center on the offender. If an offender's motive was to harm Marina, but not the children, leaving the infants alive makes a kind of cold sense. If the motive was to erase the trail of a specific adult relationship, dropping the children in a bathroom where anyone could find them cuts the connection and creates deniability. Would you assume mercy, fear, panic? The truth can hide inside a decision that looks almost kind. That leads to the next question. Who was with Marina in those final weeks? Some reporting references 2 men seen near a park with Marina and the girls before the infants were abandoned, and one name, or at least one label, rises again and again: Fernando. Pay close attention to how official statements treat that name. He is not charged, he is not convicted. He is a person of interest in the historical record because he was part of the last known composition of Marina's world. If you were an investigator, what would you do with that? You'd hunt for paper, utility bills, rental agreements, workplace logs. You'd look for witnesses who saw Marina with him, bank cards used in certain places, payphone records if they still exist, and the kind of imprints people leave even when they try to leave nothing at all. There's also the geography problem. Marina disappears in California, is found in Arizona, and the infants are recovered back in California 2 days later. Somebody moved across borders. Somebody had a car. Somebody had fuel and time, and a plan that was either careful or chaotic, but in any case was executed without drawing enough attention to stop it. People talk about serial killers when several tragedies cluster around water or highways, but investigators talk about logistics. Who knows which bypass, who checked a motel at 2 a.m., who has a friend who owes them a favor. The desert is quiet, but you have to get there. The restroom is ordinary, but you had to pick that park. Step back for a moment and feel the wheel turning. For decades, the mother can't be named by the system, and the daughters can't be connected to her. Then, slowly, the two halves inch toward each other. In 2022, Marina's identity is confirmed in official channels. Some reports point to fingerprints and database submissions finally aligning. That was a door opening. With a named victim, investigators could widen the circle, ask the right people the right questions, and hope that someone who never thought they knew anything suddenly realized they do. The daughters were found because technology, persistence, and publicity worked in concert. DNA isn't magic, it's legwork attached to a machine. It finds cousins and great-aunts. It builds tentative lines on a quiet family tree, and it tells you where to knock. You still have to knock. You still have to call and ask a stranger if they would be willing to give a sample, to answer questions that may rearrange their sense of who they are. That's a delicate, ethical dance investigators and nonprofits understand far better now than they did 20 years ago. Think about what the investigators must have felt making that call to the sisters. We believe we know who you are. We believe your mother was Marina. There are things you deserve to know. Think about how they must have felt to hear it. The story of your life just grew a prologue. Your name was once another name. Your beginning started earlier than you thought, and it began with a tragedy someone tried to bury in another state. Now comes the part where most true crime stories falter, the gap between identification and justice. Naming a victim is not the same as charging a suspect. Finding witnesses is not the same as proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt. 36 years changes people, records, and neighborhoods. People die. If Fernando was a nickname, and if the only people who knew his full name tried not to say it out loud, then the puzzle may still be missing half its edge pieces. But edge pieces can reappear in the strangest places. An old address book in a storage unit, a payroll ledger, a faded photograph with a first name scrawled in the margin. Cases like this turn on tiny details recovered in ordinary rooms. The psychology here is important. If you imagine the offender as a calculating predator who never makes mistakes, you'll miss the common reality. Most homicide offenders make mistakes. They talk too much to the wrong friend. They keep an object they shouldn't. They return to a neighborhood when they should have stayed gone. They underestimate how well the future will remember them. And sometimes they rely on the silence of the people around them, betting that fear, shame, or simple inertia will keep everyone quiet. That bet pays off for years, until something changes. A technology matures. A detective with a stubborn streak reopens a drawer. An adult child decides they want to know where they came from, and swabs their cheek. The circles connect. That's why authorities and advocacy groups repeat themselves. If you have a memory, even a faint one, bring it forward. Did you see Marina in late 1989? Did you hear the name Fernando in a context that didn't feel casual? Did someone you knew come home nervous and quiet, with cuts on their hands and a story that didn't quite make sense? Did a friend ask you to borrow a car and return it unusually clean? None of those things is proof. But proof is built out of things like that when enough of them align. Let's turn back to Marina for a moment and refuse to let her vanish into the acronym of the case. She was a mother, a person with plans, working through the decisions and pressures of a life that isn't ours to judge. Was she trying to start over? Was she leaving something behind? The alias suggests a woman who needed space from a past that pressed too hard, or a woman advised, wisely or unwisely, that another name could keep her safe. If you've never needed an alias, count yourself lucky. The world makes people make choices, and sometimes those choices have costs that come due later. Why does the desert matter? Because deserts are chosen? You don't stumble into Mojave County from coastal California without intention. Was Marina lured there? Was the trip framed as an opportunity? Was she traveling willingly before something shifted? Cases with multiple jurisdictions often die in the gaps. One agency has the body, another has the last sighting of the living, and the evidence gets divided by lines on a map that the offender didn't respect. The 2025 development that brought the sisters back into the story also brings urgency. People who might have relevant memories are older now, but they're still here. If a name needs to be said out loud, this is the period of time when it can still be heard. What about the infants left in that restroom? That piece of the story lives in my head like a film loop. Crying on a wet floor, a stranger opening a door. Was the choice of location random or meaningful? The way criminals pick disposal sites and drop points sometimes reveals more about their daily lives than about their criminal thinking. It might have been a park they knew. It might have been a place they passed on their way to work. It might have been a location believed to be quiet at a certain hour. The kind of quiet a person misjudges because they don't live enough lives to know that parks have watchers too. There's likely a reason the infants were found so quickly. In the little timeline of the drop, someone miscalculated. And if they miscalculated once, they may have miscalculated elsewhere. Now, imagine being Melissa and Tina, Jasmine and Elizabeth, sitting down for the first long conversation with investigators, then with journalists, then with the rest of us. What questions would you ask if you found out in your 30s that your mother died far away and you were found on a restroom floor? Would you want to know everything, or would you prefer the facts to come in gentle steps? Their appearance in interviews is careful and brave. There's a dignity in saying, "We didn't know." There's power in saying, "We know now, and we want answers, not vengeance." They speak for a family that spent decades talking to a wall and finally heard voices on the other side. They also speak for a public that wants not just a headline, but a path forward. So, what does a path forward look like in a 36-year-old homicide? First, refine the timeline with data that didn't exist before. If travel records survive, gas station receipts digitized by chain companies, motel ledgers that were scanned in bulk. Search them with new names and old nicknames. Run down every Fernando within a certain radius who fit the rough age and context at the time. Cross-reference with vehicles known to have made similar trips. Pull the cold case files and reread them with modern assumptions removed. Second, re-interview anyone who saw Marina in the weeks before the desert. People say different things after decades, not because they lied the first time, but because time gives language to feelings they couldn't explain. Third, push the story into places where shame and fear live. If someone kept a secret to protect a friend, today they might protect a family by telling it. When you watch other cases like this, you see a pattern. Identification, especially through DNA and kinship, comes first. Then a surge of tips, then sometimes a name. The wrong name shows up early like a wave crashing the wrong shore. Don't chase it. The right name is usually supported by a geometry of facts, documented presence in the right places, a consistent story that fails in specific details when pressed, and an inability to explain away contradictions that survived the years. A good detective isn't looking for a story that feels satisfying. They're looking for the reason paper and memory match. That brings us back to motive. If you believe Marina's murder was intimate, connected to someone who knew her day to day, you are forced to consider the reality that someone in her circle, even a distant circle, knows more than they've said. Crimes of proximity don't usually happen without tremors in the social ground around the moment. Someone saw a bruise. Someone noticed an argument that went too far. Someone watched a person wash a car very carefully, or burn clothing, or avoid a conversation in a way that sounded like a bell with the wrong tone. If any of that lives in your head and connects to Marina, speak it to someone who can put it in the record. Why does this case matter beyond one family and one city? Because it shows what time can do when it's challenged. For years, Marina's name wasn't in the case file that held her body. For years, 2 little girls lived without knowing they were missing. For years, a killer counted on time to do the final erasing. And then the future arrived. Fingerprints aligned. DNA pointed a new way. Reporters stuck with the story instead of moving to the next cycle's loudest alarm. The Mojave County Sheriff's Office kept working the old evidence with new tools. Organizations built to find missing kids brought their systems to bear. That's the lesson. Time is an accomplice until you make it a witness. What would justice look like now? It might be an arrest of a person who thought the desert would always be quiet. It might be a naming of someone already dead, with enough corroboration to give the family the truth they deserve. It might be a public record that finally tells a consistent story of how Marina's last days were spent and how the infants she protected were left where they could be saved. Justice is not a single shape in a case this old. It's a set of answers that hold under the weight of scrutiny and bring a steady peace to a family that has lived too long with fragments. For viewers, the temptation is to reach for absolute answers. It must have been X or it must have been Y. Resist that. Ask instead, what evidence would distinguish X from Y? What would it take to prove that a particular person drove from California to Arizona at the right window of time? What would it take to link a specific car to a dusty service road? What would it take to show that the person who left the infants at that park had access to them in the 2 days prior? The discipline of those questions keeps the story honest and keeps us from turning people into villains because they fit a mood instead of the facts. If you live in Ventura County, Oxnard, or anywhere Marina spent time in 1989, you can be part of something the internet is strangely good at. The collective recall of tiny, shareable facts. A ticket stub. A date on the back of a photo. A local rumor about a man who changed his name in 1990 and moved out of state. It's not your job to solve the case. It's your job, if you have something real, to add it to the pile detectives can search. A case this old moves in millimeters until the day it moves a mile. Before we close, hold the picture that matters. Marina Ramos, a mother, found in a place that wasn't her home. 2 daughters, crying in a public restroom, rescued by a stranger, carried into a life that gave them safety without the original story. 36 years pass. A phone rings. An investigator says, "We think we know who you are." That is not a headline, that is a homecoming. Bittersweet and incomplete, but real. If you know something about the man called Fernando, or the men reported near the park, or anything about Marina's last weeks, names, addresses, a specific car, a shift schedule, tell it to the people who can use it. You can contact the Mojave County Sheriff's Office, you can reach out to Crime Stoppers if you want anonymity, and you can work with organizations that know how to pass tips without breaking trust. If what you remember is nothing more than a name whispered over a kitchen table, say it anyway. The right name in the right ear has changed harder cases than this. The sisters are alive. That's not the end of this story, it's the line that starts a new chapter. 36 years of silence ended with a knock at a door and a sentence that rearranged a family. Now, the rest of the story asks for a name. If you were the person who thought time was on your side, listen carefully. Time just changed sides. If you found this breakdown useful and want more source-grounded true crime that respects victims and avoids hype, subscribe, share this video with someone who cares about getting the story right, and leave your thoughts below. What would you look for next? What detail in this case strikes you as the thread most likely to pull free the truth? I read the comments, and I'll update this as official information evolves. Until then, remember the map. Marina in the desert. Infants in a restroom. A nickname that isn't a name. And a future that finally found two people who were never meant to be lost.